Everybody, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I am your host, Kate Mollison, and I'm here with a really special guest, Jody Lavoie. Jody, thank you so much for being with us today.
Kate, I am thrilled to be here and for your season finale. So thank
Yes,
you.
yes, you made the last episode. We will be coming back for season two, so super exciting. So come and stay tuned to have more episodes with us in our next season. But for this episode, we're going to talk to Jody, about her lost story and about how she has also alchemized it into a business potential. Now, Jody, your story is a little bit unique comparatively. I mean, everybody's loss is their own, right? But
Right.
yours had a fairly public nature. Let's talk about it.
Yes, it did. And Kate, it was one of those stories that you would never ever think happens to you. And it was, so I lost my husband very publicly. And I found out the news, frankly, from the press.
Oh my
And
gosh, I can't
I
even
know.
imagine how that felt.
I felt like I was gut punched and
Mm,
just stunned. And I couldn't imagine. I couldn't process in the moment of,
yeah,
that because it's what you see in the movies. It was
right.
one of those, do you have your husband has been shot at work? Do you have a comment? And I'm like, no comment. Like,
Good for you for having the bandwidth to say that, because my brain would have been like, "Rah!" all the all the trauma and the things. So, did that come
yes.
from experience with his job and the public nature of his job to have that arm's length, or was that just a flight or fight response for you?
Meaning how I responded.
Yeah.
I, I think I was just shocked and didn't know what to say and
Mm,
scared. And I have three daughters. And so I don't know. In the moment, I felt like I don't know what's going on. I don't want to open up a big discussion can of worms until I really know the facts and can shield, protect, understand what
sure.
is actually happening before I share information with my daughters. And unfortunately, and if we kind of go back through the timeline, because we fast forwarded to the call from the press. So, sunny day in the summer, my husband went off to work in a downtown high rise in Chicago, a regular job. He was running a business. He had demoted an employee 4 days prior, who
Wow.
had then come back to the office on this fateful day and shot my husband and killed
Oh
himself.
my God. You're
Yeah,
right. That is something you only see in the movies. Like that
you
is a screenplay.
it is. And then I got a knock on the door from the police.
Oh,
And the police did not tell me what happened. They just said, your husband has been gravely injured. Can you
wait,
get a ride downtown? That's it. That's it.
wait, they knocked on your door, one, didn't offer you a ride, and two, knowing what had already transpired, did not share that information with you.
They did not. And I said, well, what happened? And they said, just get a ride downtown. I'm sure if I said I didn't have a ride downtown, they would have driven me, Kate, but or found a
Sure,
ride.
but
But
still, like I'm just
but
again, I
still,
think about from the movies, right? The cop shows up, you see that long pan of the woman in tears because the cop has to tell her, and then they take her, and so all of these fallacies that were built up in the silver screen is so crazy to dissect them when it really happens to someone you get the chance to speak with.
it's so true. And I just closed the door from the police officer, called my dad, had him come pick me up. And then by the moment I hung up from my dad, my phone rang again. And that was the press. That fast.
Wow. Good news travels fast, I guess. Well, not good news, but you know what I mean. Like, and was there any thought in your mind that maybe they were lying or that it wasn't real or that it wasn't possible? Someone just fishing for, because you obviously knew something had transpired, but was there a potential in your mind for it to have been blown out of proportion by the press? Or was that really just the cementing of your worst fear?
It was the cementing of my worst fear. I did believe
Oh,
them, and I guess it's because it was the business my husband founded. We talked about it every day. He was very conflicted, I think, about demoting this employee
mm,
just because he'd been with the company 10 years, but the role he was supposed to fill, he wasn't fulfilling it at that level. He
sure.
would have been better in another role. And so, my husband was transitioning him to a new role as the company was entering its next phase of growth and just needed a different leadership style. And he was nervous about that conversation, rightly. I mean, anybody who's going to demote
Yeah.
an employee anywhere or fire an employee or have a difficult conversation with an employee, it's
It's very
scary and
personal when you
nerve-wracking.
are
And
a heart-centered manager, which it sounds like your late husband, forgive me, what was his name?
Steve,
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 thank you. But it sounds like Steve was a very heart-centric manager. And so that must have really weighed on him to have to change somebody's life like that. And it's never personal, right? Like I've done the management thing, and it's never personal when we have those conversations with people when we're trying to just leverage skill sets, and we never think and we never hope that it transpires into something so catastrophic. I mean,
no, we
apples to
never do.
oranges, but I remember working retail, and the training they gave us always keeping like floor fixtures between you and whoever's shoplifting, because you never know if they have a gun or a knife or anything like that. And we followed those protocols, but yeah, that'll never happen. It's a similar or adjacent situation to what Steve went through, that you're just doing your job, having those tough conversations, trying to leverage skill set with no suspect or inkling that this would transpire in any other kind of way. And then it, boom, oh my gosh, like talk about
Yeah,
shaking the sheets.
very much so. And he was a very heart-centric person, which is why he cared so deeply about this conversation and this gentleman and this gentleman's family and, everybody involved. And so he, shared this news with this man on a Monday and said, I know this is probably hard. Please, go home, digest this. I want you here. There's a role for you. And talk to your family and let's continue the conversation. And they had a conversation the next day and it got a
Wow.
little better. And by Wednesday, my husband thought he's really going to accept this and it's going to be okay. And he was feeling a lot better. And then Thursday, when I got the call, I I went through my head. I'm like, Tony shot Steve. I it was real. It
Oh
was
my
real.
God.
And that did pop into my head. And I don't even know how or why it just did.
Wow. Well, I mean, I can appreciate that bandwidth. You know, one of the things that happened when Craig passed away was we were working with an attorney already for malpractice. And then after he passed, one of the first phone calls I made, don't know why, but my brain said, you need to do this. I called the lawyer after he passed away. It was like the second phone call I made. And everyone goes, how did you have the clarity and the bandwidth to do that? And it's so funny the way the widow brain works, right? In that immediacy of everything, that urgency, that ground zero, we go into that primal biological caregiver, and we just
Absolutely.
assess the landscape and look at all the things to be done in that immediacy. And, or at least for me anyway. And I have several widows I've talked to that it felt very much surreal, that out of body kind of experience, not in the way where you're watching the tragedy unfold, but in the, I don't know how I got stuff done. I don't know how I knew what to do or what to prioritize. Everyone asks me, how do you prioritize what to do, especially in a crisis? Because death in itself is a tragedy, but then you layer trauma and crisis and tragedy on top of that. It is a whole other cacophony of issues to navigate. And
It
we just have to, you know, drop of a hat, know how to do it. It is such a weird place to be in, right?
it is such a weird place. And I think you hit the nail on the head with its protection, right? And you had small children and my children were a little older, but still young. And there's this mama bear that just kicks in and something awful happened to my husband. I just need to keep my cubs near, you know?
Yeah.
And the other part of it was I had now the business to run
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Let's
that
talk
was
about that.
our plan. If something happened to Steve's, I was in charge. That was the plan. Kate, that's it.
You guys had a plan in place. So kudos to you for that. Shout out to having your ducks in a row. But even having your ducks in a row, it sounds like it still was very convoluted and complicated. Let's talk about the business. What kind of business is it, and what did Steve do, and how did you handle it in that aftermath?
Yeah. So I'm using the past tense, but it still very much exists. It's a
We love
supply
that.
chain technology business, servicing mainly large food service distributors and chain restaurants. So I developed a software that helped restaurants manage their business better, for the short definition.
Love that.
And he'd founded it at that time, 14 years prior, just an idea he had. He was a pure entrepreneur, built it from scratch, and had friends and family investors as well, and a great team. I mean, he built an amazing team to grow and scale this business. And so that's great. That was the great, wonderful news. And I helped with the business early on, like any good entrepreneurial wife. I helped do the books and do some HR and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then we talked about it every day because it was our fourth child after our three
Mm,
daughters. And it was another baby of ours that we
yeah.
were nurturing and growing. And that's not just the business, that's the people and the customers and,
Mm,
all of the world that was surrounding that. And so when this happened to us, it didn't just happen to us. I mean, it happened to the 65 employees and their families. And because this was in the press, they literally closed down the Chicago Loop. So
wow.
people, everybody knew about it. There was no hiding from it.
Mm,
Our story was extremely public, not only locally but nationally and internationally. And
wow.
and so I and my daughters, if we would walk into a restaurant like in our town, people would look and go, they'd whisper, "That's that
Yeah.
family."
Those
Not in a bad way. Everybody was so supportive, but we felt really exposed way. So we all
and
want to
grief and
grieve.
loss is already so like vulnerable making, right? Like there's this huge sense of vulnerability that you are forced into where you just have to share. Even when you don't want to, you have to share things, your thoughts, your feelings, your decisions, your all of those things are already magnified and amplified. And so for you to have that put on a silver platter and just serve to the community, what an
Yes,
incredible experience that must have been for you and for your girls.
very much so. And Steve, just as a little side note, did not pass away right away. He lived for 4 months, but he never regained consciousness. So there was a period of caring for him and taking care of the business, and the press continuing to follow and
That
nitpicking my
community
Facebook
perception,
and
is he
the
going to come back,
caregiving.
is he not, and all of those
Yes. So it
long drawn out re-traumatizations of your experience for 4 months.
Yes. Yes.
Oh
So it
my God.
it was a very stressful time, and I felt like I had to be very careful in what I said because also this is the leader of the business, and we don't want to have
Mm,
fear with our shareholders and our customers,
uncertainty
and
and
then
yeah.
what's going to happen, and then so there was this delicate balance of everything. And for my daughters, who at the time were 9, 12, and 15,
Ugh.
the 15-year-old was entering high school, and you just want to be anonymous in high
Yeah,
school. And
certainly first year.
uh-huh. And there was none of that. And
Mm,
so uh, my two oldest daughters actually in time found different schools out of state, went to
mm.
college out of state. They really just wanted to be able to share their story with people on their own terms and not,
Escape that public, magnifying glass. Wow. Like to live
yes,
in that snow globe, if you will, and
very
constantly
much
be
so.
taken up and taken off the shelf and examined and dissected on a like for being a teenage girl at one point, right? Like it's already hard enough as it is, and then throwing all of those various filters on top of it.
Yes.
How are the girls today?
They're great.
Love to
And
hear
I know
that.
your listeners can't see me, but I'm beaming because
Sorry, I can see you. So
I am just in awe of the young adults they've become and the choices they're making and risks in a positive, like leadership, taking the bull by the horns type perspective. I'm proud of them. I am so proud of them. And so, as difficult as this experience was, which it definitely was, it changed me in a positive way from how now I'm solo parenting and leading the family and having to step into a new role in that perspective. And certainly the girls and I navigated it along the way, and it was not always smooth sailing for sure. There were tons of bumps. But we did it together. And we would just say, the power of the Lavoie women. We are the Lavoie women. Sometimes it was just a mantra. Sometimes we just needed to say that just to assure ourselves
the
like we've
placebo
got
effect.
this.
Sure, yeah. I love
Yes.
that though.
Yes.
That strength in your family system and coming together and really rallying around each other in this beautiful, supportive, you know, fostering you have. I love that. And I love the way you talk about the girls. Like I really can see you. And so for the listeners out there, she is truly beaming. It is so great to see. If you could go back to yourself or to your girls, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself back then or to your girls back then?
Just be you. Just be you. Don't let the world, your friends, your society dictate who you should be. And in hindsight, certainly I was guarding certain aspects of my life and not taking risks and not putting myself out there in certain areas of my life that I do now. And I think just for teens and kids, it's so hard today, just with the public scrutiny they all have on average, regular day-to-day lives.
The normal teenage existence is already challenging.
Yes, but just be you and believe in you. So.
I love that. And I feel like everybody, not just widowhood members or people experiencing grief and loss, but I feel like everybody can benefit from that. Just be you, because the traumas are going to happen, the life experience is going to happen, and you will navigate it a little less complicated if you are just true to yourself and listen to your own voices versus the voices outside of you. I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about the business that you're doing. Are you still managing Steve's business?
I am not. So I did for 2.5 years. The goal was always to sell the business since we had these friends and family investors. But when this happened to Steve, that was not the right time.
Right.
And so needed to have some more growth in the business. And so the team and I accomplished that together. And so I sold to private equity, at which point I was like, I can finally breathe.
Yeah.
Because
sigh of relief, I'm sure.
Very much so. Everything in my life, frankly, was focused on getting the business ready for sale and taking care of my kids. And me, number 3. So, and I wish I'd put me number 1. That's a good recommendation
be you,
to
right?
people out there.
But be you means take care of you.
Yes, absolutely. But then when I sold, I didn't have any plans. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to figure that out. And so I spent some time doing that and also grieving. Kate, I really felt like I had to put some of my grieving on hold just to maintain and try to keep together family and business. And so I took a year of just me, me,
good for you,
exercising and trying to get my nutrition back on track. And I took a personal retreat or two by myself, really focused on healing. And that was important to me. I didn't want to have to think about, I've got to make a decision of what I want to do next now, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? We all should have a plan. I had no plan except to
Because the
figure.
plan had been pulled out from underneath you, basically.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
I totally resonate with that.
that time was precious. And I also took my girls on a really great vacation
I
because
think that that's super important and underrated too, right? Obviously, we don't want people to put themselves under financially, but in
no,
those early grief moments, you've touched on a couple super important things, that reinvesting in yourself once you can. Obviously, there's safety and security and stability. Those things have to come first. But once you've secured those and you have the opportunity to just breathe, to just exhale, because that 4 months, you must have felt like you were holding your breath. I know in the 3 months after Craig died, while I was navigating, the living situation, I was holding my breath. And once we got in our new place and we settled, it was that super deep, not relief, but just you could let go of a little bit of the, whirlwind that was happening around you and really start to try to put your feet back on the ground. And that is so important. The holistic wellness, how you're sleeping, what you're eating, how much water you're drinking. Are you getting, exercise? I feel like an overgrown house plant. I need sunlight and daily watering, right? Like I'm an overgrown house plant. But it's how do we start to take care of ourselves the way that we've been taking care of our children, our other responsibilities, and pouring that much effort and intention into ourselves, because that's where the grieving really happens. And it's not easy. As women, as widows, as wives, as moms, we all wear 10,000 different hats at any given moment. And then you throw loss on top of that, and we would think that it would be natural for us to bump ourselves up on that priority list. But like you said, we bump ourselves way down. So once we get that breath, put yourself at the top of the list. I love the idea of a retreat. I love the wellness idea. And that's a continual focus, right? Like it's not a one and done. You have to keep touching base on that and doing temperature checks with it and course correcting. And it's a conscious, concerted effort.
It is. And it's one that I take seriously. Having been through, that period of 2.5 years of intense stress, and my health went, it was not, my heart was skipping beats. I ended up having a reoccurrence of my breast cancer, I believe, due to the stress I was under. Wow. So there are real physical ailments that happen from stress. I mean, in general life, and then of course the grief stress too. And so please, everyone out there, take care of yourself.
That's our plea for this episode.
Yeah.
Is to please take care of yourself. Self-care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is so much more than like getting a manicure or squeezing in an extra round of golf or getting your highlights touched up, right? I feel like it's important to just really hammer home that point that self-care is so much more than a latte. It is real deep, exploration of what you need. If you were to parent yourself, like treat yourself like you're a child, and how would you parent yourself? That's self-care.
Very much so.
I love that. So now that you've sold the business, you started a new endeavor, and tell me what you're working on now.
I did. And so, gosh, for that year when I was really exploring, I didn't know what I wanted to do, Kate. And I'm very much of I want to start from the beginning. There should be a process to this. And okay, we know there is not, a clear, direct roadmap, but I did start really outlining and thinking through what do I like? What really lights me up in my life? And what do I feel strongly about? And number one, it was women in business. And so supporting women who want to grow their careers, figure out what they want to do that makes themselves happy professionally. And secondly, widows in the grieving population, because when you also layer in grieving And oh, by the way, going to work because we all need to make a
Yeah.
living.
We have to
And
feed our children and ourselves and pay the bills.
that's right. And I mean, those two together are its own combination that requires some extra special different care. And so I built a business around that. And for 3 years, I first started coaching widows in the workplace and working one-on-one via Zoom with widows all across the country. And then I wanted to make this bigger, as we all do, right? We want to help as many grieving people as we can. And so then I launched my second corporate endeavor, which is to train managers in
Mm,
companies on how to best support their grieving employees and teaching employees on how to support each other, because at least 1 in 4 people in the workplace is grieving at any one time, any kind of loss.
yeah,
That's a lot. And for
totally.
I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have lost someone important in their life and they have to go to work after X days because that's what their bereavement policy says. And it's 3 to 5 on average out there.
If you're
And you're
lucky.
if you're lucky, that's right. And you probably just finished the funeral and you've got to show up at work the next day and your brain is foggy and you can't think and you're sad and maybe
Totally.
you have to settle in a state and all of the other things on top of doing your job. And
And
if
then
you
it depends on
have
what your job is. Imagine if your job was as a probate lawyer or estate planner or financial advisor, and you are having to dissect your own situation while still performing your job duties. It is inhumane, really. Like, it is just inhumane. I often say that that experience is like being waterboarded with gasoline.
ugh, yes, it can be, and unfortunately, in a lot of the cases, it is. But for the employers out there, they can change that. They can really be on the front lines of supporting those in grief by not only the bereavement policies and days off. There's so much more that they can do to help with that, but teaching their people on how to talk to each other in grief and teaching managers on what to expect, if you will, from a grieving person of, okay, they're probably not going to be performing at the level that they were. And how can you, if possible, offload some of that work? And
Yes, I love that.
oh, they show up at the office after this loss and they probably feel a little bit like I did. They're under a microscope. Everybody's like, uh-oh, what do I say to this person? How do I treat this person? Maybe I shouldn't say anything because I don't want to stir up anything. Nobody knows how to manage that situation. And so to have a plan from a management perspective on how to do that can just change that person's grief journey.
Yeah. And I think similar to me, having that business acumen and that experience in the business echelon gives a different perspective to the gaps in that treatment post loss. You know, you from the perspective as an employer and being cognizant to the other employees of Steve's business, like, how is this affecting them? How are they going to not be afraid that they're losing their jobs? Or how do I keep everybody feeling secure, and then the perspective of going into work and how do I feel secure and how do I want to be treated and what do I need and what are those boundaries, and you don't know whether to approach people or let people approach you, and then you're feeling isolated and your company perception is maybe shifting because you're not sleeping well, not eating well, not as productive. The early symptoms of grief can mimic Alzheimer's. So you are forgetful and potentially unreliable. And then water cooler talk happens. And there's this huge ripple effect of that professional perception that just perpetuates your own self worth, your own productivity, your own self efficacy. And it becomes very self fulfilling. So, what advice would you give to managers out there who are listening, who maybe have had their own loss experience? How do they alchemize that into creating an empathetic work environment?
Yes. So first, I mean, before loss, it's important to have open communication about all issues. Your employees should feel comfortable coming to you with any problems they have, maybe professionally and personally. And so creating that open door policy is really important. But then in the grief perspective, with somebody that experienced loss, ask them, how would you like to be welcomed back
Yeah.
into the office? What would you like me to share with your coworkers or not share? And how can we best support you?
Oh, I love that.
What kind of follow-up would you like me to do? Because I want to keep checking in with you. This isn't a one and done. Okay, they're back, check, done. I've said I'm sorry. So
Signed the sympathy card, dropped off the casserole, and went back to your own world and life, because it
that's
doesn't end for
right.
the rest of us. Right?
It
You get
doesn't.
the
So
luxury to go back to your life, but we are in it perpetually.
yes. And so those check-ins with an employee of heck, put it in your calendar,
And it's something
every
with the
month,
staff
every
maybe too, right? Like,
yeah.
hey, how are you doing now that so and so is back in the office? Like, is there any way I can support you in your dialogues with them? Or if it's maybe a peer that you have to work with on a project or something, or a cubicle mate or something. How do we coach those other coworkers and support those other coworkers? And then what if
Mhm.
there's a loss in office? Say, what if an employee passes away? How are those coworkers, much to your experience with Steve's loss, how are those employees processing that loss, especially in the smaller businesses? Only 65
Mhm.
employees sounds like a lot to a business owner, maybe, but to to a community of workers, 65 is not a ton of people. So that small scale is its own little universe, this own little hub of community, and supporting those, horizontally as well as vertically, I think is super important.
Absolutely.
What's your advice
Absolutely.
for that type of support and fostering that in the workplace from a management perspective?
For those having grief groups in your office with, supported by a professional who knows how to manage those types of conversations, but have it ongoing, not
Mhm.
have it, okay, this loss just happened. Let's talk about it right now. Very important, but let's continue to follow up for those that want to participate, because not everybody ongoing feels comfortable in those types of environments. But having other professionals available one-on-one for private conversations is important as well. And I know larger companies, many of them have EAP programs, but those
EAP.
are short-lived. And so there are longer-term supportive options out there to help employees process over 3 months, 6 months, a year, because
Or longer if
grief
necessary.
isn't done in three
Right?
months,
Grief
six
never goes
months.
away. It is such a funny little animal that, you know, I could just, I digress. Yeah, I love all of that you bring to the table. And for those who know me, it sounds like there's a little bit of an overlap in what you and I both do. One of the questions I get asked all the time when I work with someone who does what I do is, aren't you afraid of the competition? I'm like, well, there's enough grieving people to go around for everyone, first and foremost. Second of all, for those of us who do the grief work, it's not about gatekeeping, right? We build this community of people who do all the same things across a very large geographic area, because you can't be expected to help everyone in the United States, neither can I. So, for the listeners out there, it's about collaboration and co creation and changing of the landscape for both grievers, but for business owners, right? How do we help business owners become human again?
Very much so. And Kate and I are part of a collaborative group of widows who have created businesses, a variety of businesses, all around supporting the the widow grieving community and the grieving community in general. And so we are able, as this entity of of women, to share what we're experiencing out there from a business perspective and help each other. And it's a beautiful thing.
It's that support, right? Creating that environment of support within the workplace.
Yeah.
We just chose to work within our own trauma and experiences. So it's a little incestuous sometimes, if you will, but we're out here to help other people understand the experience without maybe necessarily having to go through the trauma and the tragedy that we went through. It's about making it easier and clearing the noise for other people, the gift of perspective, as I like to say. Right. So we are just about at the end of our time together, Jody, but I would like to thank you for joining us and for sharing your story and your advice with the listeners. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with for today?
Yes, I'd love to just bring you back to what we talked about of just be yourself. Just be yourself.
So important. So absolutely important. Jody, thank you again. Where can our listeners find you, and where can they find more information about our little widow cohort? I'll let you share with the listeners that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I can be found at widowsontheworkplace.com. And from a corporate perspective, thegriefcompany.com. And I know we are all in our widow cohort very active on LinkedIn and social media, and we all support and promote each other there. So you could find us all there by our individual names, or I also Widows in the Workplace.
Widows in the Workplace. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much, Jody, for sharing your story and for joining me today. And with that, listeners, that concludes season 1. We will be back for season 2. Friendly reminder. Also, for those of you who have not secured your ticket to the National Grief Awareness Professional Development Conference, hop onto Eventbrite and search the event by that same title, and you will find it. I will tell my listeners a little secret. There is going to be a 4th of July promo dropping, so stay tuned for that. I'm very excited to share that we will be having select tickets available that are inclusive of a professional headshot at a reduced cost. So regular tickets are $250. This ticket will be $199 for the entire conference attendance, and you get 3 high-resolution JPEG images for a professional headshot update with your ticket entry. So please hop onto Eventbrite. Stay tuned for conference updates and details. And as always, I am your host, Kate Mollison. Thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.